So, Fáilte roimh Harnash, Trish and Lone, Jas Sian. Welcome to the second session. My name is Peadar Kirby. I'm chairing this session. We're moving now into the space of seeking to generate a popular movement, hopefully a mass movement, to put pressure both upon fossil fuel companies, obviously, upon banks and investors and investment funds, and of course on our government to put in place the sort of legislative regime that might facilitate the transition towards a low-carbon society, in this case facilitate the movement from investing in fossil fuels to investing in renewables, which of course has been greatly lacking, particularly in this country, very greatly lacking. The White Paper on Energy promises some move in the right direction, but of course it all awaits on the wisdom of the people on Friday week who they vote into power. We still seem to be thinking of that one, but certainly on the evidence of coverage of the campaign so far, there's very little evidence that any of the parties are in the slightest way aware of these huge challenges that we're facing. That's up to us. That's the power is in our hands to do something about it. I just want to, before we start, commend Trócaire on what I think is an immensely significant initiative. From its beginnings, the divestment campaign, it seems to me, is doing something that I think we've rarely done as social movements, which is to directly and frontally take on the power of capital and to seek to transform the potential of capital instead of running the planet in the interests of the profits of corporations, which is, to me, the essence of what capitalism does and how capital functions, is to move capital into a space that serves the common good, that serves a better future on this planet, that serves us moving into the far better society that is going to be, if we can make this move in a planned and ordered and effective way, the move towards a post-carbon society by 2050. That's the great challenge of our times. So we have 5 speakers this afternoon to draw on their experience, very varied experience, to advise us on how we can, here in Ireland, build a mass and effective movement for divestment as a contribution, an essential contribution to that move towards a post-carbon society. So can I invite the speakers to come up? I've been told that each speaker has 5 minutes, so I'm telling you, you have 5 minutes. I have been told we have 20 minutes for the speakers, but we have 5 speakers, so even my rudimentary mathematics tells me that we won't keep to that 20 minutes. And then I've been asked to throw a few questions to the speakers to elucidate various aspects of what they may have to teach us. And then finally, we open the floor to you. Hopefully we'll have about 20 minutes left for that. So,
would you like chair from standing up or chair from sitting down?
That's however you'd like to do it. Where would you feel most comfortable with?
I'm fine either way. Do we have enough? Oh, we've got an extra chair.
So the first speaker that I have here is Tim. I presume, was that Tim there?
It was.
Just sitting down. Tim is campaign strategy lead at Christian Aid in Britain, I take it, not Christian Aid in Ireland. And he helped to develop Christian Aid's current climate campaign, The Big Shift, which calls for the mass movement of capital out of fossil fuels and into renewables. He has written 2 books, Counter Power, great name, Making Change Happen. That's exactly what we're trying to do, is to build a movement of counter power. And you can't evict an idea. He's co-founder of the Friends of the Earth Certificate in Campaign Organising. Tim, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. My name's Tim. I work for Christian Aid, an organisation working with churches to tackle the root causes of poverty. And I've been asked to speak about 3 things: why we embarked on our divestment journey, what's happened and who did it, and what we've learnt. I like the phrasing of journey, and I'll come back to that. And it started actually at an away day, a planning day for the Paris climate change talks. And we set out on the wall with flip charts and post-it notes, like I'm sure you do, all of the different scenarios that we could really imagine. And the best one that we could imagine failed the world's poor. And that was a deeply, profoundly sad moment, that the best that we could imagine doing was failing the people that we exist to serve. So some of us started talking to each other about what we could do. And we asked each other, why is it that we're not on course to having 100% renewables within a generation? And it came down to three things after our discernment. Fossil fuels have too much power over the economy, too much power over society, too much power over politicians. So everything that we did needed to address one, if not all three of these things. So we made two strategic steps forward. The first was that we decided we were going to focus on fossil fuel extraction. If it's not out of the ground, then people can't use it. It's important for us to reduce our carbon footprints, but we were going to focus on keeping it in the ground. The second thing that we decided to do was to ask what oil companies need to get, what fossil fuel companies need to get it out of the ground. What they need is money, what they need is social license. So we started this campaign for this mass movement of capital out of fossil fuels into renewables. There was another factor, and that's that our grassroots were ahead of us, inspired by people like Mark and people like Bill. There was already a very effective grassroots group of people who were starting to do this, particularly an organisation called Operation Noah. The Quakers had divested already. It had been a 3 or 4 year journey within there. There were already active campaigns within the Anglicans and the Methodists. These were led by people known to us, people that we thought of as Christian Aid activists who'd got together and decided that we weren't moving fast enough and they were going to start. So we decided to do 4 things. We decided to encourage the churches through private advocacy to divest and to celebrate those who did. We decided that we were going to see what we could do to build this up, to divest the government, see what happened with that. Starting the process of shifting our own investments and energy out of fossil fuels, and also working towards scaling up in 2016. What's happened? Well, we launched in August with videos and so on, where we said that investing in fossil fuels is like investing in cassette tapes. It's an outdated idea. The Methodists and the Anglicans did divest from coal and from tar sands, and we celebrated that. The UK, so we worked on a campaign around coal, and the UK government announced that it would get out of coal burning by 2025, but it said that it would replace it with gas, presumably including fracking. So it was a bit of a Pyrrhic victory, really. We ensured that our own investments are out of fossil fuels, and that our direct investments are out of fossil fuels. We moved our pensions over to the most ethical available, but to be frank, the most ethical available was not very impressive. And this is just a reminder that if we need one, that our liberation is with one another, and that we actually need a campaign to be able to be fully divested ourselves. Then we said that we were going to scale up in 2016, and we've done that. We actually launched a campaign on Wednesday, finding a way that local churches could move their energy supplier. I'll come back to why we did that. And we launched that on Wednesday, and by Monday we reported that 100 churches had signed up already. So giving people things at the grassroots, ways that they can move their money, is working. We've been live for 7 months, and we've learnt 7 things. This is what I came up with on the way across. These are pieces of advice, things that we've learnt. Number 1, be bold. Incremental asks can lead to winning 1 step forward, like we did on coal, but making 2 steps backwards. Speaking truth to power means asking for what's needed, not what's politically expedient. Don't wait for the agreement of the entire sector before starting. Be patterns, be examples, show leadership. Also, don't wait until you've divested yourself. It is useful to be able to have conversations where we say, we're on this journey, we'd like you to join us. Show the love. Be understanding that institutions move slowly. Be clear if we're asking for churches to divest that we're doing this because we love churches and we want them to reflect our values. Churches, as we know, are very sensitive to anything that sounds like criticism. In the Quakers, the Anglicans and Methodists, those were the 3 campaigns that I was connected to. There were uncomfortable conversations, but all of those denominations are now absolutely thrilled at the recognition that they're getting for the actions that they've begun to take. Don't be afraid to talk about power and the problems caused by governments. This isn't a way to let governments off the hook. It's about showing governments up and showing that we are ahead of them. Do what we do best. Our role as Christians is not to be the entire movement, but to build the climate movement in the churches and represent faith-led change in the climate movement. When we use our structures, being who we are, using our language, that's when we're best. don't get down if you don't make change straight away. A typical institutional divestment campaign at the moment is taking about 2 years. My local one in Southwark is about at the halfway mark. We hope we've been going for a year. We reckon that we should get our change within a year or so, he says confidently. Do find steps along the way. So we found that local energy switching is empowering for local churches who perhaps the average person in the pew doesn't have control over the investments of their denomination, but it's a great first step, and it shows. But the language about it is important, I think. It's not just about decreasing our carbon footprints. It's about removing our consent for a fossil fuel energy system. To finish, how long have I got?
Well, you're now 6.
Oh, I'm on 6 minutes. Okay, well, I'll say the last thing when we come to questions, if that's relevant. On to the next person.
I think I've been asked to ask questions. So I'll ask you 2 quick questions. I was struck by what you said, that the grassroots were ahead of us. Why were the grassroots ahead of you? And, I mean, might we need to identify if the grassroots are ahead of us here in Ireland?
They might be. So Christian Aid obviously isn't the only climate change organiser, or the only Christian climate change organisation in Britain. And sometimes what it takes is a group of well-connected, very determined people to kick things off. And the fact that Operation Noah is independent of church structures, it's obviously in the way that Christian Aid is effectively part of many of the churches in Britain. This independent group got together, started organising, and they said, because I am a Methodist, I am going to work on the Methodist. Because I am an Anglican, I'm going to work on the Anglicans. And to be honest, I think we were being a bit cautious, and they were encouraging us to come out with campaigns and with language which was proportionate with the scale of the challenge that we face, which I think 2 years ago we weren't, and I hope that now we're getting closer to.
Thanks, Tim. Okay, we'll go on to Heather Mason, Activism Coordinator with Friends of the Earth, the agency that campaigns for environmental justice and sustainability. We knew that already. She studied international development and food policy at UCC before joining Friends of the Earth in 2014. Heather supports and encourages youth activists in Ireland to create awareness on environmental and social justice issues, including fossil divestment, TTIP, and fracking.
Thanks. Okay. I work for Friends of the Earth. I've been there for a couple of years just. 3 years ago, I did not consider myself an activist at all. 2 years ago, I didn't know what divestment was. And 1 year ago, there was definitely no mention of divestment or a divestment movement in Ireland. And I say that to make you kind of question or think about what type of activist you are and what activism means to you. Now I'm an activism coordinator. I know what divestment means, and there's definitely a divestment movement in Ireland. So change happens, and as we've heard the phrase a lot, I'm sure, in this movement, to change everything, we need everyone. And I want you really to encourage of what your role is in this movement. Divest Harvard was one of the first campaigns to start in this movement. They started with 10 people in a room who didn't know anything about divestment. Now they have 70,000 people who support the campaign. So we're small in Ireland, but we're making change. So how did we start here? We heard about this global movement. We thought it was interesting and that we should get involved, that Ireland's part of the world too, that we should definitely be starting this here as well. And so just over a year ago, we had a divestment march, and we had about 100 people there, which was very small, but it was the biggest thing that we'd really done in a while. And it was, I think, the divestment movement is the most dynamic thing that's really happened in the climate justice movement. It's a very tangible thing, and it's fun as well. We've made it very creative. That march was on Valentine's Day, and so we did a lot of messaging around breaking up with fossil fuels. Trinity, so since then, that was one day. Last week, Trinity just had the first divestment week, Trinity College. They've included lots of things to make it fun and creative. They had lots of events around food and music, and most importantly, discussion and creating relationships on this. It's not just about not having knowledge. There's lots of knowledgeable people in the room here today, which is great. But even if you don't feel so knowledgeable, it's deciding that it's important and deciding to do something about it, and that's what we've done, and that's how we've been active on this. A lot of the people involved in the movement have been part of Young Friends of the Earth, and the model of that is been to learn from each other, to kind of create that, to solve that gap between kind of having knowledge and being able to take action on it, and having other people to also do action with. And yeah, it provides a space to develop friendships and to try out new ideas and discuss it more and learn more from each other. So that's been our key ways of developing this, making it fun, making it involving everyone in it. However, there is challenges to it. We have focused on universities. We've tried different other institutions, such as banks and health insurance companies and things, to do campaigns around those, but there's a lack of alternatives in Ireland, a lack of momentum in other areas. There's a lack of an awareness of what the word means. There's more people alive on the planet than there's ever been before, that there's ever been in the history of time, and yet we're still challenged in how to create these messages and deliver these messages across the world. We have more media and everything that we did before, and yet it's still a problem. But it is such a new movement, and it's very hard to be those first actors in the movement and to have significant effect. But like I said about Harvard, it started very small, and it's massive now. To then scale up, I think we need more models like Young Friends of the Earth. We need to have more opportunities to feel that we can take on action and do things and support each other. I think the most important part of this movement is discussion, is developing the friendships. It's learning from each other. It's having creating that environment, and not just young people. Young people have been very forward in this. I would argue that grassroots groups here are very much ahead, but it doesn't have to just be universities and young people. We want people of all ages to get involved in this movement. And we need to unite with other struggles. We saw in the climate march last year that we involved trade unions. There was people from lots of different backgrounds there, and that's what we need to start seeing in divestment as well, that different people are coming on board in this. And we need to share our successes and yeah, just celebrate our movement and what we have achieved as well. So I would just like to finish by coming back to, you know, what type of activist are you going to be? In the words of Mahatma Gandhi, it always seems impossible until it's done. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. I'm struck by what you spoke about there, the gap between knowledge and taking action. I suppose it strikes me that divestment, and somebody mentioned it this morning, I forget who mentioned it, isn't an issue that the average person will readily understand. So how are you finding the possibility of both, it's not just letting people know what it's about, it's giving them a sense of the significance of this, which I think is another step, and then making sure then that knowledge leads to action. How are you finding that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, for years we've all known that climate change is a problem. I think the majority of the world realises that, yet there's very little action happening on it. Divestment, I think people don't understand the word, or they think it's about some other topic. And so there is a little bit of work that needs to go into that. Maybe we need to be using other words to describe our campaign a little bit more. But I really think that conversation and discussion is the key to this. It's not, people do understand the facts when you speak to them, but they want they want to meet like-minded people. They want to have fun. They want to be part of a movement. And we need to offer more structures in Ireland in order to allow people that opportunity to be able to not only learn more, but then to be able to do something with other people about that knowledge.
Thanks, Heather. Now we're moving on to Georgia Granger, a final year linguistics BA student at Queen's and the Environmental and Ethical Trading Officer for the Students' Union there. She's a founding member of Fossil Free QUB. Excuse me.
She'd be very glad to hear that introduction. Georgia couldn't make it today, folks. Sorry. I'm Sian, Fern. But she'd be very glad and she'd be very flattered. I'm the Campaigns and Communications Student Officer and Deputy President of Queen's Students' Union in Belfast. So I want to talk a bit about the role of sort of students, and I think what I believe to be the massive potential students' movement has to gain huge divestment victories and propel the issue forward. And of course, we've seen it very much so in NUS and in England and America, of course. So universities can be a hotbed for activism, and there's a combination of factors that typically inhibits effective campaigning in other areas. So a couple of these are young people are exposed to radical ideas, they live in close proximity to each other, and with divestment in particular, there's a definitive and clearly demarcated objective for the campaign. So we want this university to divest X, and it's very, very simple. Universities also carry sort of massive public and cultural importance, specifically Queen's does. So in Queen's University, 1 in every 21 people in Northern Ireland is a Queen's alumni. And this vast network of socially conscious alumni has also helped us very much so in our campaign. So it's very obvious that this is also a global issue. Often campaigns can seem to exist in a vacuum in a context only relevant to the group itself. With every week that passes, it seems like an A-list celebrity or religious figure or political representative or public institution and the huge public influence they have lends their weight behind the divestment issue. So universities, and more importantly, students' unions can be a leader in this, and they should. It's our future that is so desperately that we strive to change, and this belongs to the generation of students quickly becoming radicalised by the massive upsurge in grassroots activism at home and abroad. Indeed, Fossil Free QUB, our group, our divestment group, passed a motion at National Council for the Union of Students of Ireland, so the overall Students' Union for the entire country, passed a motion at this National Council to adopt unequivocal support for divestment. And the annual Congress in March is expected to ratify plans to send a divestment campaign pack to every single students' union on the island of Ireland. I mentioned earlier that universities can and should be a hotbed. And I think to the dismay of our activists and many people at Queen's, and this has not been the case for students' movement and for students in Ireland. I can only speak from my own experience at Queen's and of the student dormancy. While bursaries were stripped and the Vice-Chancellors now started talking about an increase in fees, the students didn't seem to be active, and it's particularly disappointing given the massive history of activism and stuff at Queen's. This is relevant for a few reasons. So Queen's ignored the soft campaigning tactics of our group when we started. So for basically the first year, and we wanted, Queen's is about £5.5 million of public money invested in big oil through its endowment funds and all the rest of it. So they ignored soft campaigning tactics of our open letters, staff and alumni support, public meetings, student referenda and pickets, Queen's-specific academic reports. They rejected our Freedom of Information request to access the investment data. It took us 10 months to get a hold of that, and it was damning when we got it. And we felt that our campaign was really stagnating. We couldn't get anyone fired up. We couldn't get people to join the group. And we seemed like we were going through the motions. It's not for a lack of work. At any time, our focus could be as varied as sifting through investment data or compiling financial evidence to back up our claims, or getting fun and creative by planning a fake oil spill, dressing up as carbon bubbles, and organising a fake wake and funeral for carbon assets. So, backed by what we saw anyway as the indisputable moral legitimacy of what we were trying to do, we adopted a direct action approach at Queen's University to force the issue and demand that the attention that it deserves. We occupied a QUB Senate meeting initially. This was the same group, this is the people that run the university, and this is the same group of people that had on the 14th of October reaffirmed its commitment to indirectly invest public money in fossil fuels. We also, the following week, staged to sit down outside the Planning and Finance Committee and block the doors. Instantly, we felt a surge in support, both online and in our active membership. local press for the first time tuned in with a favourable perspective on student activity, which, as a student officer, I can guarantee you is a welcome change. Yet Queen's held firm. They didn't answer emails, they missed meeting deadlines by months, and this, with visible success in our direct action approach, we decided to up the ante. On the 11th of December, we occupied the finance office of the administration building at Queen's University. So for 6 days, the issue of climate change and fossil fuel divestment was on every 6 o'clock news bulletin, trended on Twitter without interruption, and on the front page of many national papers, which is a far cry from the few column inches that we'd enjoyed for the combined previous 12 months. And so hundreds of people contacted us to find out how we could sort of, become more involved in the issue, and what is divestment, how can we get started. And something that we found, and we've always tried to sort of outline, and what we've been commended for in our group particularly, so we're all very aware of the sectarian fissures that are very evident in Northern Ireland, but this was not the case when we went seeking mainstream political support. Sinn Féin, the SDLP, the Green Party, Alliance, People Before Profit, and the Progressive Unionist Party all declared public support for our sit-in. Students in the University of Ulster, Northwest Regional College, and a university in Colorado, USA, got in touch with our group seeking advice on how to start their own. So Queen's released, at the culmination of the sit-in, Queen's released a joint statement bringing the action to an end, and a fortnight later flew its investment managers over from London to discuss internal investment policy with 3 fossil-free QB activists at the table. This mainstream political support that I also mentioned, and the different political parties, can now also be transformed into council motions. So I'm talking about local councils and public councils. Belfast City Council is now expecting a motion before it to divest its pension funds. And the parties that I just outlined now hold a majority on that council, and probably a majority in most councils in the north. So there's absolutely no reason now that they have publicly declared support for the divestment issue, why they can't get involved as well. So what I'm trying to outline is that the spark that we tried to light with activism, and it was exactly that. We got a lot of heat and stuff for it, but it's definitely trying to throw it into the mainstream. And there was, I suppose, a lot of evidence support that wasn't there existing beforehand. So not to glamorise anyway or specifically endorse direct action wholesale and just for the sake of it, but it was dramatically successful for our group and for the issue in a mainstream context. We're intricately involved in the investment review process at Queen's, and they have set a date, the 21st of June, this June, and which they will make a decision whether to divest from fossil fuels or not. And we thought that was a massive victory, and it was just trying to bring them to the table when they've previously ignored student activists, and specifically an issue that isn't typically a student issue, specifically in this country. No problem at all. Thank you, folks.
Very interesting lessons there. My question to you is, you did talk about sending packs to other student unions. You talked about the Queen's alumni. That suggests that you're thinking of broadening the client group, if you want to call it, the group you're seeking to mobilise. Tell us more about that.
Well, there's no point stopping and starting at Queen's, and that's what I said. So it's an official policy for every students' union in Ireland. And so the student officers, whoever's elected there now, are able to start a student divestment group. And as I explained, all the previous conditions about why it's so effective specifically within university, we could start to see some real divestment victories soon. So the campaign pack will be going out and stuff, and we'll be trying to work more closely with the Students' Union, the Union of Students of Ireland, to try and really make this a student issue, because I suppose it is relative to young people, but also it's trying to bring student activism back in on an issue that unites everyone, and it's dead easy to get around. Save the planet, it's easy. And tuition fees and stuff could be an issue in the future, so it's it's culminating in that as well.
Thanks very much. We go on to Joanne Garry, one of Trócaire's campaign officers, working predominantly on Trócaire's climate justice campaign, and who's been centrally involved in planning this campaign on divestment. So, Joanne, over to you.
Thanks. Congratulations on your fantastic campaign, I have to say. That's brilliant news. So I'm just going to say a few brief words about a little bit more about Trócaire's strategy, or what our thoughts are about our strategy for divestment, and how we might go about building this movement that has been mentioned a lot over today, the actual practicalities of doing that, because I think it's really important. It's fantastic to have all these people in the room, but it's so important that we don't leave this room without knowing what's next, because we might lose the momentum that we have built up today. So it's become far clearer to me just by hearing the various inputs today that we all really have a role to play in this divestment movement, very much in our personal capacities, but also in our professional capacities. Personally, I think it was said earlier that as consumers we're not articulate enough, and I think that's probably very true. We're forgetting that these investment decisions are being made on our behalf. It is our pensions and our futures that are at stake in a lot of these investments that have been referred to. So from a personal level, we should all be sitting up a lot taller and really paying attention to some of the experts that we've been hearing from. And in our professional capacities, if there are campaigners in the room, or some of you may already have your own targets in mind, your own audiences, your own stakeholders, those that are the most appropriate people for you in whatever capacity you're here in, to use your leverage on to get your institutions or organisations to join this divestment movement as well. So both personally and professionally, I think today is providing some real food for thought for all of us. I think we all are here because we have a collective aim, and it's been talked about many times from different speakers, but we want this movement to all be going to the one aim, and that is to build on the momentum that we achieved last year. 2015 was an incredible year for climate change and for climate justice in terms of national legislation, a global agreement, thousands of people on the streets. We haven't seen that kind of change, I don't think, in this climate movement, and it's really important that we build on it and don't let that momentum pass. So whatever strategies the various actors in the room take forward within this movement, we all need to make sure that we're moving towards that collective aim, which is around reducing our emissions and Ireland moving to a low carbon economy much faster than we're hearing is the intention. But Trócaire, while we've had the space in the last few months to do some homework on this issue, we've talked to many people in the sector, inside and outside, to get a real sense of divestment, and many of those experts are here today. We're not going to achieve this on our own, and that's really part of the impetus for getting you all here today. And it's a real privilege for Trócaire to be able to facilitate this kind of a day and to have so many experts here to share this knowledge. We see this divestment work as a natural extension of the climate justice campaigning that we've been doing for many years. Let's not forget, as Trócaire, the reason that we're doing this is because people in developing countries are suffering the worst impacts with having contributed the least to the crisis. So that's what we have to always keep at the forefront of our minds, as Tim referred to as well. So in terms of Trócaire's strategy, it's Cliona referred to it briefly earlier, but we'll have a political strategy, but also a personal divestment strategy, and we're thinking through the details of both of those focuses, but they will be present in both the north and the south. So in the south, we'll be talking to the Irish government in terms of their strategic investment fund and asking them to divest that, and asking our supporters to put pressure on them to divest. And then in parallel, we will be looking to the Irish banking system to see what their exposure is to the fossil fuel industries and whether banks can divest, and in the meantime, is it feasible for them to provide a fossil fuel-free banking or investment option for their customers? That's the thinking that we're thinking through with some of the experts in the room at the moment. And this is a great opportunity for us to talk to more of you to see if those potential strategies might align with what you're already thinking of at the moment. And we would see them as being mutually reinforcing. It's also been mentioned today, but all of our strategies, while they need to be going towards the collective vision of decarbonising, they need to be mutually reinforcing so that we create the demand which gives us the scale that we're looking for. The words scale and demand have been mentioned quite a few times here today, so all of us in the room, we can provide that scale that will hopefully give us the demand, which will give us the alternative that we seem to be lacking, or maybe we thought we're lacking, but now we know that they're there from the words that Ian, or the input that Ian has given us. We're all probably in the room aware of the wider global divestment movement that Bill has mentioned, and has been mentioned is the fastest growing movement in history, with $3.4 trillion worth of investments having been moved out of fossil fuels. I think there's a huge opportunity for us to capitalise on that movement here in Ireland, and your presence here today shows that there is that appetite. Something has changed, I think, since last year, and then in the last couple of years with the new global agreement, with national legislation, with the people on the streets. People are exercised. We're going to the polls next Friday. People want to see something different, and now we have the tools, as Cara mentioned earlier, with our energy policy, with our national legislation, and with our global agreement. We have tools. We have a stronger context with which to go forward with this divestment campaign. And if our new Irish government were to divest, it would send a really, really strong message that, you know, they've signed up to this agreement, that's not all rhetoric, that there's real substance behind their vision of becoming a low-carbon society. And we in this room and our audiences can make them do that faster with the pressure that we can put on. That orderly transition, I think we can be part of moving that forward. I'll just say one more thing. I think the beauty of this divestment campaign is that it's broad. There's something for everybody in the audience. There's many targets, there's many institutions, there's many of us. So we can make this very, very broad, but we're not going to do it on our own. If we can do it together, that's where the scale will be. And as I said at the start, let's try and start thinking about the practicalities of us as actors in this room with many, many stakeholders outside. How can we start to collaborate and talk to each other to make sure that we are able to create the scale that we need?
Thank you very much. I'm struck by the ambition of asking the Irish government to divest and asking the banks to divest. I mean, we're talking to very, very big actors who I think will use the sort of what Sian called the soft campaign. The response will be what the Students' Union in Queen's got with their soft campaign tactics, namely they'll be largely ignored. So how might you envisage that pressure could be put on, a bit of more direct action to back up your pressure on the Irish government and Irish banks to divest?
Well, I can assure you that we have no intention of being polite about this campaign, and I would encourage those that are going to join this movement not to be polite anymore. As Sian mentioned, it didn't have the impact that he wanted, but I think we need a really hard-hitting, effective, impactful campaign. The time for politeness, and somebody mentioned it earlier. Yeah, Bill said polite statements. We need to be bold, and we intend to be bold. And I think together we can be even bolder. So watch the space, I'd say.
Let's be bold. Remember it when we go to vote on Friday week. Last but not least, we're back to the UK with Sian Ferguson, Trust Executive of 3 of the Sainsbury Family Charitable Trusts. And she also manages the Climate Change Collaboration, which is a group of 4 of the Sainsbury Family Charitable Trusts, formed in 2011 to support pilot and research projects to find ways of reducing CO2 emissions quickly. Sounds amazing. Sian has worked with the trusts and partners in the US and Europe to establish Europeans for Divest-Invest. Is that correct? She has a background in natural science, 25 years experience working in environmental sectors, also chair of the Yorkshire and Humber Forestry and Woodland Advisory Committee. So Sian, tell us all you can teach us.
Hello everyone, what a joy to be here. Thank you very much for extending the invitation to me. I think for us at the Sainsbury Family Charitable Trust and for our colleagues in Europeans for Divest-Invest, Divest-Invest is the most impactful and indeed joyful work on climate change that we have done in 2 decades. We formed it at the end of 2014. It's a collaboration of 9 grant-making organisations in the UK, along with the Rockefeller Brothers Fund and Wallace Global Fund in the US, and several other grant-making organisations in Europe, in France, in Switzerland, and in Germany. And our strategy is quite simple, but it is working. So on the one hand, as investors, as asset holders, we reach out as peers to other investors to encourage them to divest-invest. And we lay out the argument in ethical and in financial terms. For some people, the ethical one is most important. For others, it's the financial. But we can also demonstrate through our own experience that we haven't lost out financially by following this. And we can share our own experience in overcoming the barriers which I think many face in terms of dealing with your fund managers. The second part of our three-pronged strategy is supporting the grassroots movement. Actually, Carbon Tracker can't survive on its own. The Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth, indeed Trócaire, all rely on being funded by organisations. So making sure the NGOs, the think tanks and the grassroots campaigners and activists are funded to do this is critically important. So within your Irish movement, you need to make sure that you have some funders on board to help with that. Then the third part of our strategy is engaging with the finance sector. So with fund managers and with wealth managers, to encourage them to respond to the increasing client demand for new products and helping them with that process. So maybe you can begin to see how that might work in practice. So we'll fund student groups in the NUS. We know that finance directors in universities are actually sitting behind their office doors waiting for the knock on the door to let them know there's a group of students outside waiting to camp in their office. So we can welcome them with open arms, saying it's okay. There is a solution to your challenge. The finance sector is developing products. It can meet your needs. And that is tending to work. And we do engage with finance directors with universities too. And so this has started, I suppose, over the last 12 months. It's developed significantly in the UK, and we're seeing extraordinary growth across the rest of Europe too. So, and we've seen a huge growth in France amongst French investors. We're seeing the same in Germany, increasingly in Denmark and in the Netherlands and in Switzerland. And we have to organise in a way. I think what's crucial to this is a movement with many leaders and many heroes. And you've seen two of the heroes today with Mark and Bill McKibben. But there are room for many more, and there's room for many more leaders too. And it seems to be that each country needs leadership. Leadership from a variety of sectors, so leadership from the asset management sector. And you've seen Ian and Paul before you today showing extraordinary leadership within the third sector, that Trócaire. But I also think you need leadership from the investment sector, from asset holders too. And then with this, I think, nation by nation movement to ensure there is then collaboration between the countries. So, for example, we have a fortnightly conference call between all those European nations which are involved in this and the US to exchange what we're doing. It only takes half an hour. Exchange what we're doing. Exchange, I think, notes and good practice. So Ian and Paul mentioned that they will do if you like, an idiot's guide to asking your fund manager questions about this. That's fantastic, something that we have struggled to do, though we know it's needed. And we would welcome the chance to translate that into the language of every other European country that's involved with this. And we can collaborate in that way, and it grows the movement. I think what's also essential is that the grassroots activist organisations collaborate too. And in the UK, through 50.org, we fund a divestment forum, so that enables those activists to come together to share their own experience and learning on what they're doing, to coordinate their campaigns, to coordinate communications. And I think the finance sector is certainly struggling initially with this, but it is really beginning to respond. And we have to bear in mind that the finance sector is huge and complex, and the fund managers that you might come into contact with I suppose they're not at the heart of the organisation, which might be up to speed with these issues. So some patience. So while we need to be bold and firm, we need to be patient and understand that we're dealing with with people just like ourselves who may not be up to speed with this. So we can help by sharing knowledge and pointing them in the right direction and pointing them to others whom they might be able to share from. It never helps to back anybody into a corner. And I think not least your fund managers. I think that's an important lesson that we've learned in this process. And to that end, we're supporting some work which is going to review the landscape of fossil-free funds available in the UK and in the US, and climate solutions again in the UK and US. And I can readily see that work being extended across Europe, nation by nation. Similarly, you might think that you know what fossil-free funds are, or what excluding fossil fuels from your portfolio might be. But the more you think about it, the more complex it is. Do you mean fossil fuel extractive companies? Do you mean the companies servicing those? Do you mean utilities, so the companies burning fossil fuels to supply our energy? I think defining what that is, also defining what climate solutions is really important. It needn't be complex, but we need to have those sorts of conversations and dialogues. Otherwise, it's difficult for you either to have that conversation with your fund manager about it, or for you as activists to know what you're lobbying about. And again, those dialogues are happening, and we can share that with you, and we share it across the US, Australia, the rest of the world too. And I think one final helpful point is there's a great organisation called As You Sow in America, which developed a website called fossilfreefunds.org. And that lists all the mutual funds, all the passive funds, and you can search on it according to how much fossil fuel there is in its portfolio, according to a number of criteria. There's a version for the UK, there's also now a version for Hong Kong. And similarly, that can be extended nation by nation to cover the mutual funds, the passive funds available, and searching in terms of the fossil fuel content. It increases transparency, and it makes it easier for you to know what you're invested in. So I think if you can if you can grow the movement in Ireland and connect it to the global movement in those ways and share resources, within 12 months, I can see not only a well-established movement in Ireland, but you'd be a key part of the global movement. And being part of that bigger momentum makes it all the easier to have those conversations with ISIF and government. And don't forget to identify some key iconic targets in your country who can shift the social norm. Sorry.
I'm struck by the fact that you seem to combine a lot of what you might call sort of expert accompaniment of people, fund managers talking about working with your peers as some asset holders, etc., and you combine that with a grassroots movement. You put less emphasis upon how you've grown that grassroots movement and what role that plays, how you combine both of those strategies, the more expert knowledge strategy with the grassroots movement strategy. Perhaps you could explain that a little bit more for us.
Heather said, what sort of activist are you? And I'd say that we were funder activists or investor activists, and I think all three elements are critically important. I think the grassroots campaign on its own won't work. The engaging with other investors on its own won't work. Just engaging with the finance sector won't work. It's about creating the demand from clients, I think building the capacity and the confidence of the finance sector to respond, and having that big push from the ground, from the activists to make that happen. Mark highlighted this. 350.org needs the intellectual capital that Carbon Tracker provided. That needed then to be taken up by philanthropy organisations who utilise that in their own investments, who then create the demand in the finance sector. I think it really is a three-pronged approach.